All right, can I ask Katrina Ffrench from Unjust and Howard from Amnesty UK to take the platform, please, to take the stage. Thank you. So we continue now, without further ado. We've heard from Becky and Patrick about dangerous associations. That's joint enterprise and the gang's narrative. And it's the gang's narrative that the prosecutors have used to scare, to whip up hysteria, and to put fright into juries up and down the country, to bamboozle juries, to confuse juries, and to get significant sentences. By the time that Patrick and them are talking about, I mean, believe me, they've ratcheted up the use of the gang's narrative since then. I had a client in, so I ran the campaigns for Mark Duggan, well, for the Duggan family, justice campaigns for Duggan in 2011. We all know what happened in Tottenham. We all know that as a result of what happened in Tottenham, other areas, I'm going to ask them to move, you know. Other areas kicked off. And I had a client, his name was Wayne Collins Taylor, right? He happened to come from a place called Reading, Luton, look, I've been there. He came from Luton, he went on holiday in Ibiza and he met some people, Wince, please. He met some people and those people came from Birmingham. They had a good time on holiday in Ibiza. They said to him, yo, when the Birmingham carnival's on, you should come and up there and hang out with us and rave with us. And he said, yeah. They'd had a good time, so they decided to do that. So in August 2011, just after Duggan was killed, he went to Birmingham, to the Birmingham Carnival, and it kicked off. He didn't know that the people he'd met in Ibiza were, because there's two big gangs in Birmingham, isn't it? Johnson's, I don't want to say the wrong people, you know, right? He didn't know that he was hanging out with people who were associated with one of Birmingham's premier gangs. So when he went up there to hang out with them, just to go to carnival, it kicked off. He hung out with them all night. They were bad boys. They burned down a pub, right, that they said had previously been linked to racists, and the police drank in the pub, so they went and they burned down the pub, and then the police came because it was their pub in a helicopter, and they shot after the helicopter. Nobody died, right? But they all got arrested. And my man was arrested with them. He wasn't allowed to talk because, you know, these were hardcore. And he went to court. And this is what the judge said. I know, I can see from the video that you took no place in the arson and the burning down of the pub. I can see from the video that you took no part in the shooting of the helicopter. But your presence gave succor and strength and encouraged those that did. So I'm going to be nice to you and just give you 17 years, because they're getting 30. Right? The judge said, I saw you didn't do anything, but your mere presence encouraged them. As if this guy coming from Luton could somehow stop them or was going to make a difference. So this is joint enterprise, and this is the links to the gangs. And it's, I'll get this to go. It's become worse. It's become worse since then. So that was 2011 with Wayne. They really ratchet up the gangs narrative in 2013 and 2014. And this is how they do it. This is it. This is called the Gangs Matrix. In 2011, after the uprisings and the riots and the, I mean, I don't know what people want to call them, what happened all over the country, you saw them bring Boris Johnson and David Cameron were forced back from their holidays. Do you remember this? Right. And when they was forced back from their holidays, what they came back and said, because they didn't want to come back from their holidays, and what they normally say is the bogeyman, back in the 80s when there was uprisings, the bogeyman was left-wing political agitators. In 2011, they said the bogeyman was the gangs. There was four reviews, including the Metropolitan Police Service's own review called 4 Days in August, which categorically denied gang orchestration. But that didn't stop Boris and it didn't stop Cameron. They carried on blaming the gangs. They'd just been brought in some legislation in 2009. They started drafting it. It came through in 2011. It was called the Police, Crime and Courts Bill. Police, the first one, 2009, the Policing Bill. And in that bill, they'd redefined what makes a gang. They started to redefine what makes a gang, not for black kids. They were doing it for white kids on those estates in the northeast, northwest, in places, old mining towns, places where there was no work and they weren't going to invest. And young people would come together, and sometimes as a result of them coming together, there'd be antisocial behavior. So they brought in gang ASBOs to get rid of them. But after the riots happened, they thought, oh wow, we can use this in a much more pernicious way. And this is what they did. Even though they was told there was no such thing as gang orchestration of the riots, they went on to create a database that they called the Gangs Matrix. We were being told that they had this database, and I guess we were thinking, well, if there's all these violent people out there, it's right that they should have a database, and it's right that they should police them. And it's maybe a requirement that they police them a little bit differently, because if they're gangs, well, they need harsher treatment. But that's what the state wanted us to believe. That's what the state needed us to believe. And in response to the uprisings, rather than looking at any social, economic issues or problems, rather than looking at the conditions that young people found themselves in, they decided to say it's all feral criminality and it's run by the gangs. They created this database. This is the Haringey Gangs database. I got hold of this in 2016. I was really shocked and surprised by it. I wasn't sure what it was I was seeing. What you see there, it looks as if there's lots of colours, but there's only red, amber and green. The yellow is actually green as colours bleed in. They tell us these are the most violent criminals, but when I looked on there, knowing Haringey as I do, I know that the biggest gang in Haringey happens to be Turkish. That's not me snitching. That's a well-known fact, okay? The only time police have ever walked in London routinely armed with carbine machine guns was when the Haringey Tottenham boys went to war with the Hackney Bombardiers. They're serious, they give out contracts. They're serious players. So I expected to see lots of their names here and I didn't. So that caused me concern. I saw one Turkish person. So I started to wonder, didn't you think the police don't know about the Turkish gang called the Tottenham Turks? But they did, because it said in that, in here it says, there's 4 pages, and in here it says, Tottenham, associated with Tottenham Turks, but he went to school with those black boys from NPK, so we'll police him like we police those black boys from NPK. This is supposed to be a register of the most violent people in our borough. It's algorithm created. The scores are created by algorithm. The reds are supposed to be the worst. If this was the most violent, we would have expected to see lots of red. We've only seen 6 on here. There's amber. When I looked at it, because obviously it's not redacted, I know exactly who they are. The amber ones are some serious youths. You don't take their food. But there's 60 in green. And when we tried to work out who the greens was, when I started to go out there and look and ask, and see, those are in green. There's no evidence that they've ever committed a violent crime in their life. And for many of them, 38 out of the 60 odd on there, there's no, they've never been arrested or they've never been convicted before. But they end up on this database where they're all policed as if they're hardcore criminals. And we're all told it. We're told by the police, look, we're on them. Don't worry, you're safe at night, we're on them. If we can't get them, we're going to do Achilles heel policing. If we can't get them for violence, we'll get them for something else. Well, 67 of them have never been violent before. They shouldn't be on this database. They've put them on the database, And they do so with the intent, forgive me, they do so with the intent of causing them harm, with the intent of when they get them into courtrooms that the courts will give them higher sentences. They do so because there's a war in Babylon. And they know that the young ones are our potential soldiers for the future. So they find ways to criminalize them and take them out. Well, after I saw this this database and couldn't work out what it was, or started to work out what it was, I wrote a report. It's called The War on Gangs, or A Racialized War on Working Class Black Youth. And in this report, I'm not an author, I'm more of a narrator, but in this report, I show you how they create the hysteria about the gangs, this mythology about the gangs, so that people stop looking at how they police the gangs. At the beginning of the exhibition, we have a paragraph from Newman where he talks about the Jamaicans, and this is about a style of policing that they're brought into this country where they try to other certain sections of the community, and they tell you when they're othering them that these people are wicked and more criminal and nihilistic, and we have to deal with them in a different way to how we deal with other criminals. In this report, I put in a gem in here and no one's picked it up. Right? Who knows Stuart Hall, Policing the Crisis? Who's read that book? Who knows of it? The book about the muggers. Some people know about it. Okay, and what he talks about in that book is about how the system has to create a mass hysteria about people. So they create a mass hysteria about the muggers back in the day, and then they went for the muggers and they give them exemplary sentences. We've had that done about the gangsters. Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, when they said that she was creating the hostile environment for the Windrush generation, at the same time she was creating a hostile environment for everyone who happened to be black in this place. It's not Priti Patel that create racism in their Home Office. Trust me on this, okay? We've had a government that's been working to criminalize our young people. So Theresa May, this is what she did. She did a speech, it's in Hansard. This is what she said in Parliament about the gangs. She said, wow, them dirty bastards. She didn't quite say that. But she had us saying it. Even me. She said that they're raping. They're using rape as a weapon. They're using rape as a tool. Inter and intra rape in the gangs. When I heard that, I didn't understand. Inter and intra. Because inter meant that, they're even raping their friends' partners. Intra, they're raping the other gang members' partners as payback and as revenge. And when you hear that, you've got to think, rah, these sick little, they deserve everything they get. They deserve everything they get. How can they be doing that? So we put in a freedom of information request. She said it was happening by the hundreds. She said she put aside £1 million to deal with this. She said it in Parliament. It was on telly. When we done the freedom of information request, it said in every year there was 3 people on the Matrix that had been done for rape. And they gave us a 5-year stretch. 3 people. Now I'm not saying that's good, but when you consider that there's 3,800 names on the Matrix, you know that what she was doing was trying to create that hysteria that meant that when they dealt with the gangsters, we didn't look. And that's what happened. So I've written a report where I try to talk about the history and the nature of policing and how a cross-party they set up, and with academics in tow, they set up this whole entire hysteria about gangs. And I'm not saying in some areas there aren't some young people who behave like that. There's many more now, today, than there was when they started this narrative. And again, I've said to people and I've challenged people to name the gangs. Because very few people can, even though every single one of you in this room can tell me about the Bloods and can tell me about the Crips in America. I still challenge people to name the gangs here in England, even though our young people are buying into this notion. I see on telly, I see some black people come on telly and they say, Yeah, I used to be in a gang, and now I'm not in the gang no more, and I'm an anti-gang worker. But they can't tell you which gang they used to be in. These are people now, we say they're putting their mouth where the money's dropping, right? They want to get some money, they want to get some change. So I found out about the gangs, and I do what I do, because I'm a community activist first and foremost. I called a meeting in my community, certain people was there. I made people aware about this gang notion, and then I went to find some partners. Because with us in the community alone, there's not a lot we could do. I didn't want Tottenham to burn down. We didn't want our area to burn down, and that's normally what results in Tottenham. So we try to find new ways of doing things. So when someone in this place asks us, what next? What next is to engage with others, to share our experience with others, and to use the might of others to help us to do what we need to do. So I went to, well, I didn't actually quite go to Allan, but I went to Amnesty, and I convinced Amnesty that something was going on that they needed to pay attention to. And Amnesty, thank God, were able to do that. I hand over to you, Allan.
Can you hear me? No, it's not. Can you hear me now? Thanks, Stafford. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just important to sort of say that sort of what Stafford described and what was happening in 2011 and the sort of narratives that were changed or developed and evolved conveniently basically give the Met a green light to sort of establish this database. We wouldn't have known about it if it wasn't for Stafford and some other organisations that have been, working on this previously. And like how Amnesty work is, wherever we're a global organisation, we work across the world. We work with activists, we work with people in their communities, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's in the US, whether it's Poland, wherever, whether it's Tottenham. We work with activists who actually are at the cutting edge. They are the sort of the vanguard for human rights. Much of myself and colleagues, we work in an office in London. We have some researchers go out places, but by and large, it's the people that are on the front line that we're sort of working with, and we want to sort of help. So Stafford told us about this database, and the first thing we were shocked, obviously, and well, how is this happening? I mean, there's lots of issues here. We need to sort of dig a bit deeper. So we started looking at what data was out there, the stuff that sort of MOPAC had already been doing, that some other organisations, Stopwatch, Patrick and Becky had been doing, and thought, right, okay, we'll explore this further. What was the human rights angles for Amnesty? It was discrimination. I mean, disproportionate, blatantly disproportionate. When we started doing the research, 80% of people on the database were aged between 12 and 24. 78% of them were black. I think it was, I'm going to look at my hand here because I wrote it down. 75% were victims. I mean, 75% were victims, and 35% had no previous offences. So that's obviously an issue in itself. I mean, enormous issue. But then there was the sort of way that these people were getting onto the databases, and that was like astonishing. I mean, absolutely astonishing, out of this world. I think we sort of, in one of the press releases, it's like the Wild West, 32 London boroughs, literally just left to their own devices to sort of basically create these databases, invite people to other agencies, sharing private data with agencies, using that data, as Stafford mentioned, to use Achilles heel tactics, actually consciously, proactively using Achilles heel tactics. So this is where you'd get someone like a housing association or a council to write to a tenant and say, we believe your son is in a gang. If they don't desist to be in that gang, we will evict you, your family. There was total process of intimidation that was going on. So what we needed to do was to get to pull together some research. So basically, what we always do when we do our work is we'll speak to those people that have been directly affected, the communities. But what we also will do is we'll speak to those people that are maybe the protagonists, so the police, the authorities, and find out exactly what's their story. And what we learned when we spoke to them, and this isn't sort of unique really to what was happening in London, because this happens across the world. You suddenly start speaking to soldiers or generals or police officers, and they suddenly start telling you what they think is normal practice. They actually didn't think they were doing anything wrong. They were sort of setting up, but we learned from some of them, they were setting up false accounts, social media accounts, to lure people into conversations so they could sort of basically entrap them, add them to the database. They were looking at YouTube videos, and if someone had shared a trap video or something, they were putting them on the database. Patrick talked about association. If they saw someone walking down the street with some other kids, put them on the database. So in the end, you had these nominals, what they called them, nominals, not people. Nominals, and this was basically the red, most serious offenders, the amber, potential past records, and then you had the green nominals, over 1,000 I think there weren't there, on the database. So when we started doing the research, there was sort of close to 4,000 on it, and these green nominals, that basically were just being added to the database at the whim of police officers. There was no sort of central structure of guidance how to use the database. What does it sort of comply with data protection laws? And it clearly didn't. So when we started pulling the research together, and when we spoke to sort of some of these police officers, it was interesting because the officers themselves were telling us what they were doing. So they were basically, it was handing it to us on a plate. There was a few officers as well who actually acknowledged we had a senior borough commander say it was, the gangs monitor is a complete red herring. It's absolutely just a distraction and it wastes our time. We had other officers telling us, actually, we want to be going for the violent offenders, and what we're getting told to do is to go for this person who's on the gangs matrix, who's not offended or been on our radar for several years, just wasting their time. So there's quite a lot of them are pissed off with it themselves. So what we did, we got the data, we got the evidence, and we had a conversation with the Information Commissioner's Office. So the Information Commissioner's Office, I think it's a pretty new office, isn't it? It was set up, it's a GDPR, I think it's the General Data Protection Regulations, to oversee that when all this new data regulations came in. And they were absolutely astonished, and basically said to us, well, if you could do as a briefing, that'd be handy. So we sort of sat down, we spoke again, we keeping in touch with people like Stafford, but we kept getting more and more evidence, and we kept getting more information, and we kept learning about the sort of impact that this was having on communities, on individuals. It was pulling people into to criminalisation. It was assuming they were criminals and treating them like criminals, and as a result, they were forced, in many respects, into criminality, or the risk was there. So it was just, we decided then we'd do a report, and we spoke with Stafford. I remember speaking to Patrick about just, how can we work together with you guys? And it was interesting. I know someone asked from the floor earlier about working collaboratively, and I think, the power does come when you can actually get a combination of different people from different organisations and communities and people who know what they're talking about. But also what we wanted to use Amnesty for was a platform for that, really. We didn't want to go charging in and saying this is all Amnesty's work. We wanted to sort of work with Stafford, Katrina and others and let them be the sort of the face of this. So that's what we did. We had a launch at Amnesty. Stafford, I think you were on the panel, there was a couple of others. And then we sort of had a campaign, and we put pressure on the Mayor's office, who were actually they'd already announced they were doing a review. And this is always kind of, I can never quite get the timeline on this, how this happened, but they set up a review board and invited, reference group, sorry, and invited us to join. So basically, I think they might have regretted that, I don't know. But I think actually, though, I do think there was, I think Becky mentioned earlier, there was sort of someone in Mopac, it felt like there was someone in that room who was probably, you know, more sympathetic and wanted to get things done. And so we got the opportunity to speak face to face with some senior police officers, other activists, and some academics as well, weren't there? And I think we kept pushing them because their idea of a review, which is often what you get from sort of, you know, public bodies and governments, is a review or a consultation. Is usually they've already decided what they're going to say and what they're going to do, and it's usually nothing. So we just kept pushing, and you know, it felt like there was points I certainly felt myself like, are we being strung along here? You know, we had those conversations, and we were like, all right, we'll give it another go, we'll stick at it. And then, you know, actually, they did the review, and the review came out. The ICO issued an enforcement notice, which was the most serious notice it could issue, which gave the Met Police 6 months to comply with GDPR regulations. The Met Police basically admitted. They basically admitted it was racist. They said it's, you know, discriminatory, disproportionate, and took off about 1,000 people, 1,000 green nominals, which was a result. There's an ongoing annual review, which is something that we're certainly keeping our eyes on, and we'll keep watching. But I think the fact is the database is actually, yeah, and this actually isn't Amnesty policy, this is my opinion, the database is so flawed, it needs to go. And you can't, what they say, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Yeah, you know, it's just tainted, it's just not really fixable. But I think that sort of one of the lessons that we took from it at Amnesty was that working with organisations like the Tottenham Rights Group, like Unjust, like Stopwatch and others, to sort of who actually had this experience and had the knowledge and were actually in the communities, was something that we needed to basically, you know, work more on, to sort of look and think, how are we going to do more of this? So again, I know it was raised earlier, but in answer to one of the points that was made, you know, Amnesty want to be there, and, you know, Amnesty recognise the rights and the injustice, you know, the lack of justice that is, you know, that's happening in this country. You know, and we're constantly seeing attacks on sort of, you know, we're seeing new legislation coming in, and it's usually written pretty crappily, and it's usually it basically leaves stuff open to interpretation, and it's open to interpretation often in a way that suits people that want to erode your rights. So you've got to be on it all the time, and you've got to make people alert to that, and you've got to, like, form coalitions and work and think about how we can actually get some influence and put pressure on the authorities. You know, I agree, it's got to be the communities and youngsters and activists, but we've got to use whatever is at our disposal. Any tool that we can, we've got to use it, and well, that's certainly something that we'll be continuing at Amnesty. Over to you.
I think Allan does us a little bit of an injustice there. He's not wanting to brag or boast, but because of our engagement with Amnesty made a complaint to the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office. They sit above government. The Information Commissioner's Office came and done an investigation. We may have made a mess up by only identifying the police. They looked at the police and they found that the police in creating this database had broken all privacy, all data and equality legislation. They said that it wasn't their job to deal with this breach of the equalities legislation. That was the Equalities and Human Rights Commission's job. The Equalities and Human Rights Commission has let us down again because they decided not to do nothing. The ICO did something. They put the Metropolitan Police Service under special measures for 6 months. That's not insignificant. That's a significant victory for us to get that done. And then eventually they went and they removed the names of many of those on this database in green. All right? Can't tell you how, that's a major victory. They've chosen, it really is, because they wanted to police these out of existence. But they've chosen not to tell these young people that they've removed them from the matrix, which means that these young people don't understand that all the impediments that were in front of them before that allowed them and encouraged them to live a certain lifestyle have been removed. They don't know that. They hope that they're going to continue living this same lifestyle. Right? We think it's really important, and Kat in her discussion, she'll help us to get there. We think it's really important that people understand what they've done with this database, because it's about the way that they share this information across the system that chills and culls young people's lives. And we think it's really important that people hear and listen to this, because they haven't stopped. Even though we stopped them in their tracks here and we got them to remove those names, the architects of this system haven't stopped creating their architecture.
Thank you, Minister. So I think my contribution is going to speak about the impact of the Gangs Matrix, and it's really useful. Whilst I'm sitting in front of you as the founder and director of Unjust, a social enterprise, I was the chief executive of an organisation called Stopwatch. So I think it's really important that I kind of tell the tale of, as it was three or so years ago. So I took up post in May, and I had the privilege in my first meeting to meet Patrick Williams, Dr. Patrick Williams of Manchester Metropolitan University. And it was said, for Stopwatch, we have a big issue because we're hearing from young people that they're being stopped and searched at high rates, and they really can't understand why they're being stopped and searched. The use of force, the incivility, the disrespect that they're experiencing at the hands of officers, they can't understand why. So my understanding was that Patrick was commissioned to undertake some research, and he was supported by Temi Mwale, the director of the Forefront Project, which I just want to shout out now, because people like Temi on the ground supporting the young people, the community that Stafford is speaking about, that bring to light the many issues that many of us do not know about. If they were not doing that grassroots work, we wouldn't be aware. So Stopwatch undertook a qualitative piece of research. My understanding is that Patrick spoke to about 15 or so young people, aged between 17 and 32. And the idea was that we had the Amnesty report, which spoke to the database. And I should just say, it's an Excel spreadsheet. In case you're thinking it looks familiar, go to Microsoft, you can get it. It was nothing high-tech at all. So my thing is looking at the report that Patrick did and finding that there was a common theme here, that the term gang was being racialized, that young people were being stopped and searched at higher rates, that the level of, dare I say, service, it wasn't a service, disservice they were being afforded was very, very high, and that they didn't have any understanding why. So through the piece of research, I undertook some interviews, and what became very apparent was that the information being shared by the police was being shared widely. So you had local authorities, housing associations, colleges, schools, youth clubs, probably probation and other DVLA as well. Stafford will touch on that. And it wasn't just a policing tool, it was being used to influence and impact other areas of your life. So through conversations, people were saying, I'm walking to school with someone, or on my way to school and we're being stopped. And I don't really understand why. Officers are saying it's because of the area you live in, the person you're associating with, who you've been seen with, or maybe actually just because we know your brother. As simple as that, we know a relative. So because the relative is up to no good, that means you are too. So young people were speaking about being labelled, about not understanding their rights, but also the lack of opportunity. So people that were being told their children couldn't go to that college because they were part of a gang. Child's like, I'm not in a gang, but I want to go to that college. No, it's not safe for you to go there because there's another gang there. I'm not part of that gang. I'm not part of any gang, but you can't go to education. There were people that had their children removed because it wasn't deemed safe anymore because the child was in a gang and other gang members could come to the house. So the safety aspect had to be that the child was taken outside of the home. We also saw youth workers who were driving people to youth projects or picking them up, because that's what you do, guardianship, stewardship, and their cars had been flagged on the DVLA, on the ANPR. Sorry, I'm using acronyms. I think that is the automated registration plate thing. I don't drive, excuse me, I got Oyster card. But they were being flagged as being known gang nominals. So when they're going shopping with their mum and their child in the car, armed police are doing hard stops to say that this is a gang-related car. People are having to sell their cars. So it wasn't a matter of we're stopping crime in the moment, which I can assure you there's nobody in this room that doesn't want the police, if there's a serious violent thing going on, to attend. That's what most people do want, because they don't have the capacity or the skills to deal with that themselves. We are not in that space as a community to necessarily be able to handle violent things. You may need to call the police. What people aren't expecting is the police to be stopping people on their way home from school, outside of school, at youth clubs, and gathering information that then is being used to harm them. So at Stopwatch, we produced, I say we, see? They. They, whoever. At the time, a report was put out called Being Matrixed, and the idea was to give voice and amplify voice. I was privileged enough to have Stafford come to the launch of that report, and I think this speaks to me, how do we do this? One hand cannot clap. One hand cannot clap. Hear me when I say that. You can click, but you cannot clap. And if it wasn't for the Amnesty giving us the space, if it wasn't for Stafford giving us the fire and the information, we wouldn't be here now. And that's why organisations such as Stopwatch can step into those spaces and have legitimacy because of men like Stafford and other organisations like Amnesty International, which give a way for smaller organisations to amplify their voice. So I think it's very important that we look at collaboration, because there is only so much capacity that we can take on. I think it's collaboration and not competition when we think about where do we go next. So what did we do? We launched a report, and I think I really want to praise the report. Patrick, fantastic report. I hope I did justice in trying to edit it down and make it sizable, and to Temi and to the young people that participated, but also the youth workers that continue, and I'm going to come on to that because it's really connected to the policing bill, that are in those very sacred spaces for people in need. A social worker, a youth worker, a teacher, those people are valuable assets to our society, to communities. What we're seeing now is that the policing bill is gonna put more, I say constraints, it's gonna require them to share more information. And what we've seen is that the sharing of information has done nothing but harm the people on the matrix. And this is not about excusing serious violent criminals. If they're violent, they'll probably be locked up. They're not gonna be on a database. Find the evidence and lock them up. But what we saw being used was that people that were green, because they were hanging around, let's just say hanging around your friends or your cousins, you were then getting the police come and squeeze you to find out what do you know about amber or red people. So I saw it as actually the police are using this to target the weakest people, the weakest and the ones that are the green ones, to try and get them, I don't want to say the word snitch, because it's not even snitching if you don't even know what you're talking about, but to share information because they knew they wouldn't be able to get it from other sources. And I think that this is state exploitation. So when we published the report and we saw that the ICO got involved, fantastic, the enforcement notice, the MOPAC called a reference group. At the time, it was called a community reference group. Stafford looked at the room and said, there's no community in here. I can't carry the community. And when we say community, what do we mean? So MOPAC went out and did these, I think, community vehicle buses speaking to different groups. And I think what we have to recognize is when the state responds, they respond to package up and to legitimize the harm. They do not respond to disrupt it. They respond to give a rationale for why things have needed to be done. So when they were going to communities, they were speaking about how do we promote the gangs matrix as being a useful tool. I can't sit in a room and be talking about promoting the gangs matrix. We should be talking about how do you get your child's name off? How do I know how to speak to a solicitor about has my child been removed? What was the implication of when they were on the gangs matrix? What services were they not afforded? And how do I challenge that? So it was like, is it the magic roundabout, a bit before Doodle, the person on there going around, gave me a lot of headache. But I recognised as the only black woman in that meeting, other than MOPAC staff, that actually, who is here, and this is not a disrespect, who is here listening and talking? I don't blame Temi for saying she didn't want any part of it, because she did recognise we can't be co-opted and no one can, but while she was in that room, she wasn't serving people that she felt she could serve. As CEO of Stopwatch, I felt I needed to be in that room to challenge. And I'm very glad that I was, because we kept asking questions around how do you get your name taken off? How do you challenge if you've been on there and you've had something revoked? But also, there was a shift of, we're not going to do the gangs matrix anymore, we're going to have concern hubs. So this is where we now have, you're not at the threshold of you've committed a crime, but we're concerned you might be. I didn't understand. So Lewisham has a concern hub, and it's got people at risk of criminality or vulnerable. And that for me is a catch-all to catch anyone. It's a dragnet. So you can be a victim and you can be a perpetrator, and it means we're not going to treat you any different. You're going to get the same sort of policing. The concern hub is meant to do differently because they're saying they've learnt the lessons from the Matrix. The fact that most people don't know what the concern hub is concerning for me, no pun intended. So we challenged that narrative about sharing the information. They did invite us to come and look. To be honest, I didn't have the capacity, and I didn't want to be seen to be rubber stamping something or saying reform was okay. Last year, it was 2019, over 1,000 and odd names were taken off the Gangs Matrix, and Channel 4 contacted me for an interview. And I remember her saying about institutional racism. So she said, do you believe that institutional racism still exists? And I understand that when they ask you these things, it's a strip-up thing. And if you'd seen me in an interview a few years ago, I'd have answered it, no, or yes. And I said, I've yet to see evidence that would demonstrate otherwise. And I, up to this day, say it's my most diplomatic and tactful answer. Because rather than put it on me to prove it isn't there, show me where you've changed. Show me where it isn't the disparity. We look at stop and search. And I'll close because I'm appreciative of wanting to hear from people, but the level of policing is unacceptable. So for us at Stopwatch, it was because there was high rates of stop and search. That's how young children were being alarmed. But we're now hearing other things of, let's be clear, children being strip searched because they think they have drugs on the street side because they're gang nominals. That's what's happening in certain areas. You're not even being afforded to go to a custody street and have an appropriate adult with you. You're being taken into a bully van or on the side of a road and you're being strip searched on the roadside. This is 2021 in London, that's happening. And it's not a London thing. We spoke about the Gangs Matrix. Birmingham, they've put up an ethics and risk board to try and monitor and look at any of the disparity that's coming out of this. We need to wake up. We need to stop drinking the Kool-Aid, and we need to accept that we cannot police ourselves out of serious violence. And that isn't to say there are not people that are committing violent crime. However, if we don't want more people to commit, we don't build prisons, we invest in education, prevention, community building, and we bring those people together to feel part of society and not alienated. And the other thing I'll say is, a lot of this comes from the Misuse of Drugs Act and the prohibition of drugs. This is the 50th anniversary of the Misuse of Drugs Act. If we want to talk about stemming or disproportionate, let's have a conversation around decriminalisation and legalisation. And that's not me being soft, it's understanding the drivers of our criminal justice system and also enabling adults to make decisions about how they choose to live our lives. We're not an authoritarian state, and we mustn't become that. So I really want to just say thank you to Stafford. I want to stand up and say thank you to Stafford. Thank you to Stafford. So it's a privilege to speak, and I'm going to hand back over to the main man. If anyone got questions, more than happy to answer them, but I wouldn't be in this seat if it wasn't for a man like Stafford. So thank you, Stafford.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, we kind of rushed through that, and I realised I rushed through my own section, all right? And the reason why I did it, I'm sitting there thinking I should have set it up better for others. The reason I rushed through is because I want to do the walkthrough, all right? And that's because, no, I'm serious now, all right? It's because I've done this walkthrough so many times, and I recognise now that to talk about a part of our history outside of the rest of our history just doesn't do it justice, all right? It just does not do it justice. Because what we were showing you in the history is how often the state comes and attacks us, how it changes its attack, how when we get a victory, By getting the courts to hold it to account, it changes and it comes back again. I didn't set up this properly, telling you that 99 out of 100 on there happen to be black. The 67 of them happen to be in green, have never committed a violent crime. But the police share this information, and it then makes these young people feel that they're the only ones in the world that are being policed in the way that they're policed. I didn't tell you that this was behind Operation Shield, and when we stopped Operation Shield, the police came to us and said, okay, Staff, you think you're good, watch what we're going to do now. Operation Shield was when they was going to call them in. I didn't tell you that in 2011, after the riots, that Boris wanted to bring in Bill Brannigan from Bratton, from New York, from America, as a gangbuster. And I didn't tell you that when Bill landed, because Boris and Cameron wanted to make him mayor before they did with Hogan Howe. And I didn't tell you that when he landed, he said, ha 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 ha. I could do that like a comedian. Because he did. He just laughed. He said to them, you be careful what you hope for. You think you've got a gang problem here now? In America, they kill over business. Here, they're killing over social media and arguments about girlfriends. He warned them, but they carried on putting in place what they put in place. And that ultimately, it's what's fueling the violence. And the real reason why we're here talking about it today is because in the police and crime and sentencing and courts bill that's going through Parliament right now, 2021, where some of our comrades on the left have recently heard, because of the killing of Sarah Everard, who happened to be killed by a police person, right? He's a policeman. They want to say he's off duty, a policeman, that even though they tried to sack him, right? Right? They've found out that within this bill, the right to protest might be reduced. Well, we're people who have protested for many, many years. Right? Protests for the black community who disproportionately stopped and searched, disproportionately have the use of force on them, disproportionately framed, fitted up, disproportionately sentenced, disproportionately killed. So removing the right to protest kind of impacts on people like me. But I would forego that right. Even though it's a basic principle, I'll forgo it because I know what else is in the bill. What else is in the bill is a duty to prevent serious violence. Any person from a black community hears the word prevent in legislation needs to start paying attention because they used it on our Muslim brothers and sisters and we don't hear their voices no more. The architects of the gang matrix, what I didn't tell you because I want you to come on the walkthrough and I don't want to spoil it, what I didn't tell you is the architects of the gang matrix, when they created this in London, they're now in situ in central government. That the principles of this, even though the Information and Commissioner's Office has come down on them like a ton of bricks, the principles are still in that new bill. The Information Commissioner's Office put them under special measures, and they said at the time, we're going to carry out a second investigation, and we're going to investigate what the Met does when it works with a third party. So I'm going to quickly give you an example of when they work with a third party, like when they work with the DVLA. When we stopped them from doing this in Haringey, this is what they said, all right, Staff, you think you're good. Watch what we're going to do next. What are you going to do next, Mr. Police Officer? Watch this. Yo, youths. This is all these youths on there. There's 100. They all get a letter from the DVLA. Yo, youths. The police say you lot smoke copious amounts of skunk weed. That makes you unfit to drive. So, yo, youths, run back your licenses. 100 of them, you know. Some of them are 14 and 15. Oh, you haven't got a license? Run back your provisional license. Then you have to take a blood test before you get it back. Then you have to tell us when last you take cocaine, heroin, diazepam, all kinds of drugs I've never seen before in my life. Really dehumanizing stuff. The kind of stuff.
Say stuff, just to stop you, but that's a big thing because what that then means is you see now the gig economy, people just jumping on stuff. You ain't got no license to even earn money. So it's been taken away. So when we say this is not just it's punitive in the sense of stopping bread out of your mouth. That's pushing you to maybe have to sell something illicit because you can't go about your business to earn the legal way because your license has been taken. So it's not a matter of, oh, just can't drive anymore. No, this has implications for your ability to earn money, for your ability to socialise, for other things. Sorry to cut you, Staff.
This is about your human rights. It runs absolutely deep. So they work with a third agency to impact those young people. And what the ICO said when they saw it was, wow, we're going to conduct another investigation. And that investigation is going to be specifically into what happens when the police works with a third party, because they do so with the intent of causing harm to the target. And this is why the government's rushing through this bill at the moment. They want to rush through the bill before the ICO come and report back on the harm that they cause to the target. Because I'm going to repeat what I said earlier on. Yes, there is some bad things that are happening out there. Yes, some youths are getting into gangs, mainly because they think it's their only way to survive, and they've always been told that everyone else is in a gang. Some young youths, are doing a bit of grooming. I don't see it that much. I see lots of youths who volunteer to be in the gang because they believe that there's no other way. They're being kicked out of the system, there's no opportunity, they can't get no job, they can't even get no benefits. They say, yeah, I'm a soldier, send me in the gang. But the truth is, this system is grooming our young children for the gangs. And we need to come together to support our young people and create alternatives so that our young people don't fall for that.
I think one of the issues with the ICO for the investigations, this is a couple of years ago now, was that people don't know if they're on the matrix. So someone might tell you because your youth worker has your best interest, and they're going to tell you, you know, you really need to not hang around with those people anymore because the police have said they're known and that's put you on there. But in essence, people don't know they're on there. So when it comes to, like, if you're in any job, performance management, how can you performance management something or speak to people if you're not telling them about diversion services to get them out of that, because the whole point is to catch them in doing something wrong? And I think that's part of the problem, is that people within the matrix, and I think it was appropriate name, being trapped, are unaware of that, and it's very important. I know that Equal are doing some call out around getting people to complain. I just want to be really real, it takes forever. You know, we had a young person, his mum came and said, I think my son's on, actually, I read about it, I contacted them and said, we want to help you to see if you're on the matrix. So we went to solicitors, it was about to kick off. That young person was arrested for a fight. The person had autism, they'd been getting cabs their whole life to school, had no friends, no nothing, was arrested for a fight, and because they had been told they were on the gangs matrix, were remanded. So it went from wanting to do a strategic legal challenge to now I'm on an ABH charge, looking at several years. I don't care if I was on the gangs matrix before, I need my liberty. So it completely flipped, and I think people have to be very prepared for the apathy of the state, for it taking forever, and that's why I'm putting a call out. If people do want that support, please do get in touch with Unjust. Please do get in touch, because we will hold your hand. My job is to be the donkey and for you to lead. It's to take the weight, it's to carry the weight, because fighting racism is costly and it's tiring, least of all when it's from the institution. So it's very important that people come to organisations and know we will carry the weight and we will connect you to others. There's Liberty in the Room, there's Hodge, Allan and Jones, there's Byman's, there's Garden Court, there's lots of solicitors out there that, you know, want the cases. We just need to understand, to be able to spot what's wrong, and to have the confidence and the trust that there's people that are batting for you. And these people here, the people you've seen today, are batting for you. Go to Jenga. You know, don't suffer in silence.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to open up the floor.
I think you guys have done a great job of expressing that it is about joined up thinking, and that goes in terms of us forming policy from this side as well. So there's a piece of legislation that we're trying to get through now called Jaden's Law. It's a young man who was excluded from school and then murdered at 14 years old. Now, there were so many systemic failings within that we came up with something called the Schools to Industry Pipeline, which is to create wraparound care. This is why I talk so much about data, the justice, all of the organizations collaborating at a national level. So what this law would bring in place is stopping schools from directly excluding young people or putting them into PRUs without creating and without identifying an alternative educational provision, which is where we can bring on all the delivery partners from the African Caribbean community for African Caribbean children as educators to get the statutory money per child that they're not getting access to now, rather than entering them into this to criminalize them. So it's really about identifying delivery partners around the room so that we can join those dots rather than just a question. But I do have one particular question. Knowing there are two court systems in this land, the common law and the legislative law under the government, how much are we in conversation with the high courts that are common law courts to be challenging and working on behalf of our human rights in this country?
Well, I can only say from what Amnesty do is we would basically, we would lobby and try and speak to them about human rights issues, but most of our work is, there's a lot of it's focused on the legislative process and actually trying to prevent the sort of those areas of rights being eroded, which is what we're seeing constantly at the moment. I mean, it is literally every piece of legislation. We talk about legal avenues, but there's the GR bill, which is a judicial review bill, that is really worrying, and that could be another way of inhibiting the work that activists and lawyers do. Things like the Nationality and Borders Bill, you're constantly, it's almost as if they intentionally, I'm sure they intentionally draft these bills in a way that is just going to be exhausting, that you've got so much to actually look at, to scrutinise, and then to sort of draft amendments and to table those amendments and then get enough support in the House to get the amendments through. You're like, but you've got to keep at it. We've got to keep at it. It's like the system it doesn't work in our favour. It doesn't work in your favour. But that doesn't mean that we can't challenge it, and that's what we've got to keep doing, is challenging it at every opportunity and using every tool at our disposal. And one thing I think that we can all do is that we all have MPs, and we were talking about politicians earlier, and there's one thing that motivates a politician, that's being elected and getting your vote. So honestly, it doesn't matter what colour your politician is, what party they're from, go and lobby them. Just lobby them, be a real pain, just hassle them, keep talking to them about issues. Your local authorities, everyone, use that.
I don't like to challenge anyone from the platform, but let me tell you something. What he's saying, if you said that 10 years ago, maybe, but there's no opposition here. There is no opposition. Let's be clear here. The Labour Party is run by someone called Sir. The Lib Dems is run by someone called Sir. And the Tories run by, there's no opposition. It's run by someone called Boris. There's no one fighting for people here. We talk about representation. We've had one MP in here, it was Claudia Webb. She's a sister. Love Claudia to death. We've never said, the MPs that we have in that house there, who happen to be black, and they're not accountable to us. We need to create something new. The Tories have worked out this system, they've got this, man. We, as people, need to create something new. It's about people power. And it's about whether or not we're going to stay in silos and fight by ourselves whilst they drown us, or whether we're going to come together. No justice, just us, and demand that we need to see this system change. But sorry, Allan, don't rape on a politician.
Do I get a right to reply? I can't disagree with what Stafford's saying, but actually it is what's there. It's just like what we've got to do. I'm not saying you're going to get miracles. I'm not saying that everything's going to suddenly look rosy, but we've got to use everything at our disposal, everything, and that is something we can actually do. That's not a bad idea, but actually, honestly, people in this room, you should seriously think about becoming.
It's a system, it's not just a system. If you like a man, They wouldn't want to send a man there. Politics is politics. We know this. Politics corrupts. Right? It's not a joke. And there's another thing in this country. Everybody knows it. It's all right for politicians to be lying bastards. Everyone laughs about it. Because this is the accepted. This is the norm. We need to do something different. I'm sorry. Bye.
Hi, my name's Allan. I'm a lawyer from Liberty. Firstly, I just want to congratulate everyone involved in the Gangs Matrix work, because it really was, from a legal perspective, a really incredible result, and has impacted hugely on all of the people that have been removed. Even they might not know it yet, but I'm sure that is feeding through into their daily lives now. I hope so, anyway. Just a couple of questions. I wanted to ask, obviously this is just the Haringey Gangs Matrix. We know that improvements have been made to the Metropolitan Police's Gangs Matrix. It's very far from perfect. People don't know if they're on it. There's no system of review. So there's a long way to go still. But do we also know how many other police forces have similar matrices? I've heard that West Midlands do, and that Greater Manchester does. Liverpool as well?
My understanding is lots of the major cities and gangs unit, gang suppression unit.
And if they're not there after the bill's passed in 2021, then they're going to be everywhere. Because that's the information sharing is going to create them.
And is anyone, just for my own sort of purposes, is anyone aware of any work that's being done in relation to those matrices in other police force areas?
Get on it, Lana. Get on it.
Oh, I'm on it. Oh, are you? Oh, excellent. We can have a chat about that. Okay. I'll be in touch. Oh, nice to see you. Yeah? Oh, okay. Just one final thing as well. Liberty's looking to bring a challenge against suspicionless stop and search, section 60, stop and search. So we are looking for any young people of colour who have been affected by that. So if anyone wants to put someone in touch with us who might be interested, who believes they will likely be stopped under section 60 or any other stop and search power in the future, then do get in touch, because we need you urgently. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I can partly answer that question. I have a background in community safety teams.
It's question time.
Sorry?
Question time.
Oh, yeah, two-part really. And it's just to say that essentially what the police are doing is just renaming it and rebadging it. And just changing the colours, essentially. That's a long-winded way of saying that's the approach the police are taking. And I guess the question I did want to ask, though, is kind of linked to this, because in the community safety teams that I've worked in, the police are still using gangs matrices. So what's the next step, so to speak, and how do we continually challenge, especially the Met Police, in how they use these the gangs matrix? Because I know personally and professionally that they're still using it.
Okay, so for me, the challenge comes from you in your professional life, making sure that you ask robust questions and scrutinising their rationale when they say to you why they're doing what they're doing if it's being used. I think from a kind of outsider point, it needs to be challenged. So if you do see campaigns, you need to get behind them. You also just need to be speaking to young people to understand whether they're being stopped and searched, what are the police doing. So we haven't touched on even the use of technology, fingerprint scanners, mobile phone extraction devices being used to gather information, harvest information. So I think it needs to be that are you speaking to children, young people, other adults? That's the first bit, is building the awareness. And once you start to build the awareness, it becomes much easier to understand where do we challenge. But I wouldn't say it's difficult to challenge, but you need to know which bit to challenge. I think it's about understanding, and if you are a professional, being able to ask those questions about why are we doing this, what's been the outcomes, and being robust and not being scared to whistle blow if you think it's fucked up.
Guys, there's a sophisticated warfare going on with technology, and if you can put in for a subject access request and there's been an admission of guilt of the law being broken, it's £50,000 for somebody to be outside. It's £250 per head as a prisoner, £250,000 per head for a prisoner every year. That's what they're worth. Is there no way they can claim compensation and bankrupt this system? Because the minute they start losing money, that's when they'll wake the fuck up.
Speak to Lana behind you. We've got a lawyer in the house. All the lawyers in the house meet at the bar. Let's start strategizing before the drinks.
But that is part of what we want to do, and that's why when they've released 1,000 people off of the database, they're not telling those 1,000 people so that they can actually go and take court proceedings. That's what I want to do, is identify people who have been on the Matrix and get them to take civil action against the police. That's what we hope, but they're the most difficult people to engage with because of their own experiences. Patrick?
And I think I know the answer to this, but it'd be really good to hear Amnesty, Allan, just speak to it. And the question is, why didn't we go for abolition of the Matrix? Why didn't you conclude in that report that we should abolish the Matrix?
Yeah, it's a good question, Patrick. I think what we thought was, where we approached it from was it had to comply with human rights standards. That's what Amnesty's added value was, if you like. You know, that's where we were coming from. So we, you know, they went through the process. They made some concessions, and they've committed to ongoing reviews. I mean, I still think there's scope to call for it to be dismantled. Like I said, personally, I think actually it needs to be dismantled. And I think that's where really, you know, linking it back to the question that was asked previously is why we need to keep, you know, the work on the Matrix it's nowhere near done. You know, it's nowhere near done. And that was like first salvo, really. And I think what we need to do is keep on it and to be ready to just sort of, you know, we've got that to come out if we want to say it just needs to go. You know, there's no evidence or no compelling evidence that they're actually really making any significant changes, and it's still impacting negatively. You know, we know it is, and we just need to be ready to do that. But yeah, I know we had those discussions, and working for someone like Amnesty, you've got, you know, it's just the sort of the parameters in which you're in. Sorry?
I don't know how that's even going to be relevant, Chadwick. And you're asking a question out of sync, man. We called it Amnesty. Amnesty didn't start
I
this.
didn't hear the question, but I'm
Says that Amnesty International was set up by an American snitch. But that's a different
No,
conference.
it was set up by
That's a
British
different
lawyer,
conference. Alright.
Peter Henderson.
Right, is it Kadeem? Yeah. Chadwick, man. Kadeem. Right, we have a young person in the house. And bit of a wordsmith. Kadeem is going to end the session with us with, do you want to introduce him? Or?
Yeah, I will. So I met Kadeem on Twitter. He had had an awful stop and search where he was standing outside his property and waiting for the rain to go, and the police came to attend to another issue, and he ended up being assaulted by the police, a taser drone. He nearly lost his eye because an officer hit him so hard with a handcuff. To add the insult to the injuries was he was arrested and charged with obstruction and assault of a police officer. I met him on Twitter at my time at Stopwatch, attended court with him because I could see he needed support. He was convicted, unfortunately. He lost his appeal and was made to pay the police officer £250. Thankfully, with the grace of God and I suppose great people, he's been able to use that experience to become a real activist. He's part of No More Exclusions trustee. He's was part of Stopwatch, still part of Stopwatch, part of Unjust, being part of the Ffrench and others. And I think it's just really important because he could have gone a different way, because they said he was in a gang. He lives in a gang area. Man's not in a gang. He was at work. He goes to work. He'd come back from his job at River Island. You know, had been doing the right thing, and because of the police narrative, because of where he lived, because of him having black skin and living in Brent, it meant that he ended up with a criminal record. So I think it's really important to let him speak his truth, and I thank Stafford for giving the opportunity.
Basically, I just wanted to share a poem and keep it kind of brief. Obviously, I feel like my poem kind of touches on everything anyway, and it's not the shortest. So, yeah, I'm gonna get into performance, obviously. Yeah, my hood's gonna go up because I don't really do eyes too well, but yeah, it's all right. Obviously, you see me now. Yeah. So yeah, this poem's called As a Person Affected because, yeah, as a person affected. It's open for other people to kind of submit their poems of how they were affected, but it's a series that I wanted to run, but this is something I came up with in my bedroom, basically. As a person affected, I'm sick of running around not knowing my next step. As a person affected, I'm marginalized and upset. As a person affected, I'm up all night, insomniac, getting no rest, but they excluded my protest. As a person affected, I'm my own contest. As a person affected, I expect accountability. As a person affected, I feel like the world's angry and racial biases are killing me. Some of the scholars, some of the community say they care. As a person affected, they're just like the MPs who claim to help. Far and few between, I've seen myself. Is anyone hearing? I'm trying to fix an issue I've never had trouble declaring. To my detriment, I understand my emotions. Being black, vocal and passionate's antisocial. Me, I love to speak about injustice. Protecting my friends, a lesson to the public. Police said I'm a gang member involved in recent foolery, but I feel like part of a thriving community. Yeah, I got kicked out of school, me too, you know the regular message. Disruptive in class, he plays the fool. Specifically he, if it's she, nails too long, hair issues, the problems, braids or weave. Am I talking about you, or am I talking about me, or am I talking about something you've definitely seen? Let's just ignore it. Talking about race gets boring, it's not important. Exclusions are okay and humane, no bearings on our aspirations and not for the teacher's personal gain. Even though the facts so blatant, my slim chance of success before death aren't adjacent to those of me being dead selling drugs or visiting stations. Police and teachers are thieves trying to rob me of my future and dreams, and race ain't the reason, see. Politicians don't get punished for indecency, no doctors know I'm sick, just believe me, please. Gangs and guns aren't improving me, the narrative's changed, your movement ceased. My losses were substantial before the pandemic, thoughtfully though, black's not aggressive. Right to protest, I can't even stand outside my house. I've spoken to police chiefs and superintendents, which one of you, I don't care which borough, want to sort this out. Attend to this, criminalized for restless stims, and you're still in power with reckless grins. Life, handcuffed for expensive things. I think you forgot to mention this and this and this. I've had my challenges, battles with my teacher, said I wouldn't be much. Trauma, things that I remember, my work getting torn up. Trauma, things that I remember, lost love for it's all, lost trust for it's all love. It's not even, I'm not even an accomplice. Me, I'm trying to be the most accomplished. I used to play games, but I quit now and the world's my stage. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was it, so. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'm going to come off the stage now, but yeah, pass all the good messages on to Katrina. I'm listening on the side, but thanks for listening, everyone.
Well, there you had it, the impact of the everyday nature of British policing. I want to thank you all. You've been a really good audience. You must need a bit of a break now, so I'm going to give you a break. What I need to know is, and I want to thank the panel, Katrina, Allan, myself, young poet Kadim in the house. I want to thank you all for being a good audience.